Eternals is joining Black Widow, Shang-Chi, and the Disney Plus shows to end 2021's entries into Phase 4. While this film features characters that general audiences are likely the least familiar with, it could provide the foundation that literally everything else in the Marvel Cinematic Universe was built on. If you couldn't tell from the trailers, the Eternals have been a part of pretty much every turn in human history. The biggest flex the introduction of the Eternals could set up has very little to do with them and quite a lot to do with their genetics. You see, while the Eternals have an incredibly difficult time reproducing with each other, they are able to with humans. This has introduced some of the Eternal DNA into humanity. This would be the easiest way to introduce the X gene that's responsible for the mutant race from the X-Men. So it is entirely possible that the way the MCU will introduce the biggest superhero team since the Avengers is with the godlike beings who act as their ancestors. This emergence could be the thing that awakens the X gene and allows the likes of Cyclops, Jean Grey, Beast, and the rest to finally make their MCU appearance. The only problem is that mutants like Professor X, Wolverine, and Magneto should already be mutants running around out there. But that's a problem for a different day, one I'm sure Kevin Feige already has an answer to. The latest Eternals trailer answered the biggest question Marvel fans have had about the superhero team. Where were they during the whole Infinity Saga? Well, the answer to that question brings up more questions than it actually answers. You see, they aren't allowed to interfere directly in human events unless one of the Deviants are involved. Their entire purpose on Earth is to fight against this race of beings who were also created by the Celestials. The problem with this is that a segment of Eternals left Earth and moved to Titan, where they made their new society. One of these Titanian Eternals was born with a deviant gene. His name was Thanos. So yeah, the Eternals 100% should have fought Thanos. Oops. Maybe the film will establish that they can only fight against deviants who specifically come from Earth. That, or none of them got the world is ending Google alert. The Eternals aren't the first race of secret superpowered beings that have been introduced in the MCU, though it would be forgivable if you don't remember the first. In what seems like a completely different era now, ABC launched the TV series Inhumans on the big screen to universal panning. Still, as far as we know, this hasn't been retconned. The Kree experiment that led to the creation of the Inhumans was only possible because Kree scientists experimented on an Eternal first. So, the Inhumans are arguably unwilling descendants of the Eternal race. This detail might be left out of the Eternals, but it would be an interesting Easter egg for the Marvels to throw in while they're presumably dealing with those pesky Kree one more time. Though, I don't think this helps Anson Mount's chances of ever playing Black Bolt again on the big screen. It's not your fault, Captain Pike. The show never stood a chance on a network TV budget. In terms of Marvel's fictional history, there's very little that the Eternals don't have their hands in, at least a little bit. Seriously, in AP history in the Marvel Universe, there's like a whole semester on the Eternals alone. One of the major events that they were present for was the sinking of the city of Atlantis. Rumor has it that the second Black Panther movie will feature none other than Namor the Submariner as the main villain. If that is to be the case, it wouldn't be surprising at all if we see Atlantis sinking while the Eternals are recounting their history. In the trailers, we definitely see a volcano going off, which could be the scene where Atlantis is stuck in the ocean. The only question is whether it'll be better than Aquaman's Atlantis or not. I do think the Eternals could provide an opportunity for Marvel to tie all of their various mythologies into one shared narrative. While Marvel Comics has done this with the Eternals to an extent, they would need to go a little off the comic history to put everything under the Eternal umbrella. For instance, with the Blade movies on the horizon, I think it would be very natural in the MCU if vampires were the descendants of the Deviants. This would keep Blade from having to establish its own separate mythology about where the vampires come from, and would make it so much easier for Mahershala Ali to just get to the vampire kicking. Let's be honest, no one goes to a Blade movie for a history lesson. You go to see him roundhouse kick the fangs off a descendant of Dracula. Let Eternals do the heavy lifting so Blade can do what he does best. Currently, the part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe that seems most out of left field is the existence of Asgard. Are they aliens? Are they gods? Are they an advanced form of sorcerers? At the moment, we don't really know. It'd be very easy to just say that the Celestials, who are well known for populating the galaxy with their little experiments, created the Asgardians too. This would make Thor, Odin, and the rest of Asgard's finest cousins to the Eternals. Frankly, that would be a lot more believable than the galaxy accidentally producing two godlike races of people who look exactly the same. A common ancestor would make all of this a lot cleaner. Not only that, but it could lead to some hilarious banter when Thor inevitably comes into contact with Icarus and his family for the first time. He has a long history of teaming up with them in the comics, so it would be shocking if they never so much as met. As far as blanketing everything in the Marvel Cinematic Universe under one shared mythology goes, it'd be very easy to also tie the creation of Wakanda to the Eternals' arrival. We know that in ancient Earth history, the Eternals arrived on the planet just as humans were building society. It would be very cool to see that vibranium meteor side by side with their spaceships as they showed up on our great blue planet. I mean, if they had nothing to do with Wakanda, but they had a hand in influencing every other major society on Earth, it doesn't really say good things about them, then does it? I mean, the one society that has flying cars and advancements far beyond the rest is the one where the Eternals never visited? I mean, that makes it seem like we'd all be a lot better off if they would have just set up a tent on Mars instead. There's one thing about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 that still doesn't make much sense. Ego, the living planet, and first Celestial to get a real part in the MCU, flew around the universe, siring children everywhere he went. The only problem was that none of them were worthy enough to inherit his powers. Everything changed once he met Peter Quill, who was the first one to be able to use his powers. Frankly, this makes no sense because, sorry Peter, there's nothing all that special about him. The only thing that makes sense is if Peter was able to use Ego's powers because he had eternal DNA inside of him from years of them mixing with humans. This could have been the trait that allowed him to play catch with his dad for the first time. It was such a sweet moment, until Ego ruined it like 40 minutes later by showing everyone he was a Thanos-sized supervillain. Those who aren't as familiar with the comics might be a little confused as to what Jon Snow is doing in this Marvel film as Cersei's boyfriend. Well, it turns out that he's actually a superhero in his own right, the Black Knight. The history of the Black Knights go all the way back to Sir Percy of Scandia, a knight associated with King Arthur himself. The trailer for Eternals shows what looks like the first Black Knight attacking someone. This means that the Eternals themselves may have been a part of the first Black Knight's origin. If they aren't, they surely will be a part of the reason why Kit Harington's Dane Whitman will be pulling his sword to fight against the forces of evil. Just, hopefully this time his character gets a better ending. Carol Danvers is one of the most powerful heroes in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but I'm not exactly sure how. The blast from the Tesseract probably should have disintegrated her, but instead it turned her into a hero who could probably go toe-to-toe with Superman. The thing that would make this make sense is that her latent eternal DNA allowed her to absorb this energy instead of get burned to a crisp by it. I mean, she shoots gold beams out of her hands, she can fly, and apparently she doesn't age. It's entirely possible that she's more or less an Eternal now. This could be a plot point in the Marvels, since you just know that the Kree have been trying to figure out just how Captain Marvel was powerful enough to wipe out one of their fleets. They could easily confirm her eternal parentage. I mean, it's even possible that one of the Eternals is secretly her father. Anyone want to give Icarus a DNA test? The Celestials have been in the background of the MCU ever since the first Guardians of the Galaxy.
Observe.
While that film famously showed one wielding a power stone with all the ease of a vacuum cleaner, the one who perhaps deserves the most attention is the one whose decapitated head now makes for a lovely city that the Collector calls home. Knowhere, which acts as a base for the Guardians of the comics, is a huge mystery. What could possibly have destroyed something as powerful as a Celestial and then left its head floating in space? If the Eternals are going to stand against their creators, it would probably be helpful to know how someone was able to Ned Stark one of these gods thousands of years ago. That may be the key to saving the entire planet from the judgment of these beings. That is a big problem the Eternals usually deal with. From the looks of the trailer, the time when the Eternals had the most to do with human history was during the time of the city of Babylon. Both trailers extensively feature the city and the Eternals' interactions with it. They helped the city's agriculture, entertained the city's children, and likely informed their advancements as well. I doubt that the Marvel movie will worry too much about portraying the city accurately, but Babylon really isn't one that Hollywood pays too much attention to. Maybe this will stir some interest in this period of history. I mean, you just know that there will be 1,000 YouTube videos about how inaccurate it is. The biggest part of the Eternals' history was their big conflict with the Deviants that nearly destroyed the war. Unlike the Eternals, the Deviants reproduce like rabbits. They enslaved humans, and it was up to the Eternals to save us from their grasp. Even though they were seriously outnumbered, the Eternals managed to prevail due to their powers and their ingenuity. This conflict will almost certainly be a big deal in the movie, one that explains why they go at the Deviants like I go after a spider anytime I see one in my apartment. This being the MCU though, it's likely that they will find gray areas where the comic made everything black and white. Just like the Kree-Skrull conflict in Captain Marvel, it wouldn't be surprising if the movie painted the Deviants in a more sympathetic light than the comics usually do. Like most ancient civilizations, ancient Egypt was also influenced by the Eternals. What makes it notable for comic book fans is who the most famous ancient Egyptian in Marvel Comics is. That, of course, would be En-Sabah-Nur, otherwise known as the Thanos of the X-Men mythology, Apocalypse. Just like with the Mad Titan, the Eternals could hint at Apocalypse's existence in the MCU by recounting how they took him on back in the day. The other big villain of ancient Egypt that could be a big deal for the Marvel Cinematic Universe is Rama-Tut. This pharaoh came from the future and took over the nation. He was none other than the man who would be Kang the Conqueror, aka that villain from the final episode of Loki. Kang looks like he's gonna be this saga's main villain, but that doesn't mean they can't set up the next one. Apocalypse could easily be a threat that would put the Avengers and the X-Men on the same side. That, or he could put them on opposite sides if they decide to do the Avengers vs. X-Men route. Let's be honest, they're definitely gonna figure out how to make the Avengers and X-Men beat each other up. Since the Eternals played a big part in Greek history, it should be no surprise that they also played a big part in Roman history as well. For a good deal of their culture and religious beliefs, Rome kinda copied off of the Greeks' homework. It's entirely possible that famous figures like Julius Caesar or Marcus Aurelius were Eternals or inspired by them. You could also make the case that someone like Icarus went on to become Shakespeare and write plays about his own history centuries later. For my money, I'd love it if they threw some references into the Ridley Scott movie Gladiator. How amazing would it be if Russell Crowe's Maximus Decimus Meridius was MCU canon? I mean, if we're living in a world where all the old Spider-Man actors get to be in MCU canon, why not just start folding in famous action movies as well? Aside from Rome, Greece, and the other Hollywood historical favorites, the Eternals also influenced the Aztec Empire. While it's unlikely to see in the movie, it would be great if the Eternals hanging out with the Aztecs got a little screen time. That time in history rarely ever gets any big screen attention, and when it does, it isn't exactly the fun kind. To see the wondrous architecture and civilization the Aztecs created rendered in Marvel's expensive CGI would be worth the price of a ticket alone. Well, that is for history buffs anyway. Has there ever been a Marvel glow-up as big as the one for Kumail Nanjiani? Well, that's a trick question, because the transformation he made from a supporting actor in Silicon Valley to someone who belongs on the cover of Men's Health magazine is no small feat. He basically did the transformation skinny Steve Rogers made into Captain America, but in the real world. Apparently, that wasn't the real difficulty he had with his Eternals role, though. That would be the extensive dance sequences he had to perform in the movie's Bollywood scenes. Evidently, his character Kingo is a huge fixture in the Bollywood world of the MCU. This isn't the biggest influence the Eternals have ever had, but it's definitely something. For a less-than-athletic stand-up comedian like Nanjiani, learning the intricate dance moves he'd need to know to convince people that he was Bollywood's #1 star was incredibly difficult. Chris Hemsworth may have had to pack on muscle to play Thor, but he didn't have to learn any ancient Norse dances on top of it. Alright, let's be honest. There is absolutely no way the Eternals would not reference World War II. This is Hollywood's favorite time period to reference. The trailer has a few moments that could show our new heroes surviving during arguably the worst conflict in modern human history. Like the movie The Wolverine, we could even see them surviving the detonation of the atomic bomb. For my money, it'd be really funny if they pulled a Forrest Gump and put him in the background of scenes from Captain America the First Avenger. I mean, how funny would it be to see that scene where Cap triumphantly comes back to base after having saved Bucky and the Howling Commandos, only this time with Icarus clapping in the background? I mean, ideally we'd have a sequence where Angelina Jolie's Athena goes full Wonder Woman on a platoon of firing Hydra agents, but you can't have everything you want. If you haven't put it together from the fact that the movie's main character is named Icarus, the Eternals had a hand in ancient Greek history too. As much as Hollywood loves the Greeks, it'd be surprising if we don't at least get one scene that shows them kicking it with the likes of Aristotle or Sophocles. Most notably, the Eternals were often mistaken for the Greek gods, who 100% exist in Marvel Comics, by the way. While you might think Icarus is the basis of the Greek myth of his namesake, that would actually be the story of his son. Young Icarus is the one who flew too close to the sun and fell to his demise. His father, the character in Eternals, took up his name as a living tribute to the boy he'd lost. It does explain why Icarus is said to be the Eternal who has the least interest in humanity. The final way the Eternals influence human history hasn't happened yet. The plot of the film likely revolves around the emergence of the ancient celestial Arishem the Judge. This being will come down to Earth to judge its people as worthy of survival or not. Chances are that we will fail and the Eternals will have to take their creators down. That will be a fight worthy of standing alongside the final battle against Thanos in Endgame. At this point, I think the only things the Eternals didn't have to do with are the Sorcerer Supremes. Nope, those are a completely different group of superpowered individuals who decided to bow out of almost every major conflict in the MCU.